the gap between the rich and the poor. The gap between rich and poor is relevant because it's the hallmark of neoliberal capitalism. But the thing is, we need to understand the nature of this gap. It is actually potentially a dangerous gap for capitalism. But this gap, at least in the core countries of capitalism, the gap is not what is important. What is important is upward mobility. And enough people are rich, over 50%. Enough people are rich in the core countries, and there is upward mobility, like at least there is a hope that people can become rich or become less poor, for example. And that is rich as compared to. So that's what rich means for a person who is poor. And there is enough people who can upwardly mobile, who are upwardly mobile, and there are enough people who are rich at different levels. So that's a critical mass. You don't need a majority in any country, probably to change the system. You need to mobilize 3-4% of the population. So if 3-4% of the population are committed to a system and they are rich and they are educated in this system, then they can, and the others people follow them, then obviously that reduces the chances of any fundamental change. So just because there is a gap, and that's a fundamental gap, and that's a dangerous gap for capitalism. Given the other things I just said, the gap is relative always. Rich and poor, these are relative terms, and there is a possibility of upward mobility. At least there is people can imagine, or people can think that they can upwardly move on. They can move upward, etc. if they work hard. And if there are enough people who are rich at different levels, then the opposition sort of stymies. And obviously, poor, really poor, they can't do anything on their own. But if people who are educated in the system and who are in the active echelon of the system, if they think that they are not, they lose their hope or prospects, then they might organize, etc., and try to make some drastic changes. But until that happens, just because there's a gap between rich and poor and the gap is increasing, in its own is not sufficient to mobilize people towards revolution, let alone change in the system of rule.